All right, we got another DM video. I love peeping this dude's stuff. So we have Last Epoch versus Diablo 4 versus Path of Exile. I actually had a video kind of similar to this that I had drawn up, but I scrapped it because I absolutely hated it and I didn't feel like re-recording it. But I'm very curious to see what he'll say about these games. Cause Last Epoch I think is the perfect middle. Obviously Diablo 4 is getting a lot of hate, and PoE has been the established ARPG for years at this point. So I'm curious what he say. I know him and Rax have been playing a ton of Last Epoch before launch. I mean, it's gonna throw a whole bunch of new people looking at it. Why even throw D4 into the equation? Because it's still an ARPG that came out, and it still has a lot of people that play it, even though the majority of content creators and actual ARPG players don't play it. Still, a whole bunch of people are playing that game. I mean, it's the perfect casual game, and the casuals are still the majority of the gaming market.
Other videos where I explain both Diablo 4 and Path of Exile, you remember the graph goes something like this. You're going to end up seeing Diablo 4 players enjoy the game a lot right out of the gate. It is going to flatline as they hit more of the end game, and then we see a either steady decline or just a straight flatline in terms of enjoyability with the game. Right here, peaking around level 70, right around completing the campaign, interacting with whatever in-game mechanics there might be, doing your first Durio run, attempting Uber Lilith. This is sort of the high point of the game right about here. And then after you've achieved these things, the in-game itemization, etc., goes down.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, the beginning of Diablo 4 is good. Like early leveling still feels good, doing all those kinds of things, starting off on like World Tier 2, but he's exactly right. Once you hit the 70s, it just gets kind of meh. It's still even fun going in seasonally playing, but once you're 70, 80s, once you just get to rinse and repeating nightmare dungeons, I mean, it's like we've memed 1,000 times. There's just no content.
The occasional artificial spike that might happen as people are either engaging with the new season mechanics as they come out, although some of these spikes have been quite good. Season 2 is notable, or creating, for instance, new characters. You might get these temporary spikes of enjoyability. Now, if you follow along with my Path of Exile explanations, you're going to know that the enjoyability of Path of Exile does not go up very quickly, and there's this giant gap that happens right about here. And this gap is what happens when people end up playing the game long enough to realize how much time it is going to take them to understand the game. This is hitting either the first difficulty spike in the campaign, maybe your first act boss, you hit Mervo or something like that. It can even happen as early as the beach, directly when you make your first character and open up the skill tree. So this beginning can happen quite fast where it drops off a cliff. But after that, if you continue to push through, then you're going to see the enjoyability graph slowly increase over time as players are learning Path of Exile, making new characters, figuring out new builds, and being committed to the game, until eventually you're going to see this continue the ramp as they try new game modes. Maybe they try hardcore, solo, self-found. Maybe they actually got their builds down, new season launch, they're enjoying it every single time more and more, until eventually we hit this apex right here of the...
He's absolutely right on this point. This graph perfectly describes how I thought about Path of Exile, right? This was like the first season that I played, or actually I would say like first season I played was like here, like I was liking it, still had no idea what the hell I was getting into, barely played any seasons, and then this was like the second time I did it where you kind of started to really realize like what the hell this game is about, and you're like, oh man, I don't want to play this, but then right around the same time Diablo 4 came out, so got on Path of Exile, and this I would say, man, my curve is I mean, I would say mine's probably more like here. I mean, I love PoE. It's been so much fun. I can't wait for every new season at this point now. Once it comes out, I will probably never miss like a season until PoE 2 comes out, and there's two games, and one of them I'll probably have to bite the dust, but yeah, I mean, I would say this is entirely accurate. I'm curious to see what he says about Last Epoch, because I would probably say Epoch is almost like the campaign kind of drags for me. Like it's like you kind of get to like here, the beginning campaign is fun, but then it gets kind of long and it's just kind of like meh. But then you get to the monolith system and you're good. But I wouldn't say the campaign's like too long. I just would say I don't think you don't want to be running the Last Epoch campaign every single time on every single character every season. That's gonna get old really really quick. But I think Epoch's almost is kind of perfect along with PoEs.
Path of Exile enjoyability crossing Diablo 4, but it does take a significant amount of time in order for these games to cross over. aka Path of Exile, takes a significant amount of time to enjoy, whereas Diablo 4 offers that enjoyability right from the get-go, which is what makes Diablo 4 so well right in the beginning and be accessible
Mm-hmm.
to most players.
With
But
that.
Path of Exile expand their enjoyability over time. So if this is what the graph looks like with the two current most familiar ARPGs in this genre, where does Last Epoch fit into this equation? So after playing Last Epoch, I think I've got down how I feel about Last Epoch as compared to these two. Now, we're going to know for a fact that it's going to be more enjoyable from the beginning than Path of Exile. Like I said, Path of Exile's barrier to entry for the average player is very high. One of the
100%.
things that Last Epoch does so well is make the game easy to understand while you're playing it. But I think it's fair to say that Diablo, the first time you play Diablo 4, you are going to have a...
This will be a hot take. Last Epoch does not even get remotely challenging until almost like the very end of the campaign. Like remotely challenging. I mean, obviously, if you are somebody who, when Last Epoch comes out, you're brand new to the ARPG genre, right? Like it might still be a little hard. But if you've had kind of have any experience playing any ARPGs, whether that is PoE or even a game like Diablo, I genuinely think you can get on Last Epoch and make it to end game. And I think you'll be okay. There's literally only maybe one or two bosses in the campaign that are like tough, but it just depends how you're leveled and everything like that. I know the one dude, the big thing that you fight in the water, like I died so many times fighting him, but I was pretty under leveled when I went in, so it is what it is. But there's also not really any penalty for deaths either in Last Epoch. Same with PoE and D4. I mean, PoE has your 10%, you lose 10% kind of every time you die, but that's not as big of a deal in the early levels. That's more like that really kills you in the late levels. I've never felt under leveled because of the death penalty in PoE until, you know, you're in the end game. But I agree with this 100%.
A lot of enjoyment out of the campaign the first time. I think it does the campaign the best out of any of these games. There's good cinematic.
100%. 100%. I mean, obviously from a cinematic perspective, like Diablo's gonna have the best one. It's the newest one. It's funded the most, so I think its cinematics obviously are better. But from a campaign of what did I actually surprisingly like care about more, I would say Last Epochs is my personal favorite. But that's only because like I've always kind of been a fan of the like shifting through time and things like that. So I like it for sure. I'm not deep on the lore, so if you ask me like, oh, what's going on, like explain it, no shot. But I do like the concept of kind of like moving through time. Diablo's was cool, but obviously any Diablo game that you don't go back to hell and other than the campaign, like what are we doing here?
Voice acting, etc., and the problems with the game are after the campaign, but not during the campaign. Whereas Last Epoch's campaign is good, in my opinion, it's more accessible from a quality of life type of feature than Path of Exile, which makes
I just realized I'm an idiot, and he was saying that D4 has the best campaign. Yes, okay, that one's on me.
the beginning of your game time in Last Epoch more enjoyable, but it's not as fun of a campaign, for instance, as Diablo 4. However, where Last Epoch starts to take over is right about the point that I was mentioning where Diablo 4 starts to fall off. And that is because what Last Epoch actually ends up having is a good amount of quality of life features that make the game not annoying as you continue. Right about at this point is the point in which Diablo 4's stash tab problems, lack of loot filter, once you get out of the campaign and start getting into the portion of the game where it's the grinding, etc., these quality of life features really start to become noticeable, which is why the game's enjoyability either flatlines or starts decaying. Whereas Last Epoch's both quality of life continues to allow you to enjoy the game, and then in my opinion flatlines a little bit here, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, allows you to continue to enjoy the game, as well as makes the respecking option very enjoyable as well. So we're also going to see Last Epoch getting these sort of artificial bumps like I was mentioning down here with Diablo 4, because respecking is quite easy, and that will give you these little jumps of enjoyment of, oh, actually I
Respecking. Oh my god. Respecking in Last Epoch is a blessing. I love that you can pick any of your abilities, any of your skills, reallocate skill points, everything like that. Obviously, if you basically get rid of, say you're doing an assassin and you get rid of the blade dancer, I'm blanking on what the attack is. Like it's one of the blade attacks, and say you don't want it anymore and you want to put something else in there, you immediately can just take it out, put a new one in. I think there is a gold cost, but gold's never really a concern. And I mean, you're kind of chilling. Not being able to change masteries is kind of tough. Can you not change masteries? Yeah, I guess you can't change masteries. You can take things from those masteries, but you can't switch them. So yeah, that is true. That is one downside. We'll see if that sticks around long term.
I don't want to play Smite. I want to play Judgment, or I want to play Warpath, or what have you. Or I learned how to mix the two, or I got some unique item drops that actually are very impactful and build changing, and that ramps my enjoyability. Now, something you might say while looking at this graphic, especially if you're a Path of Exile player, is DM, why is Path of Exile lower in enjoyability than we have here of Last Epoch? I mean, you're a big Path of Exile fan. Surely you think Path of Exile is the better, more complete, funner game to play. Well, in my current iteration, I actually do. However, we have to keep in mind something. In order for you as a Path of Exile player to enjoy it more than Last Epoch, and I do believe, to finish this graph, I think Last Epoch does plateau at some point. I don't think it decays, for instance, as much as we're seeing here with Diablo.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This right here is so true. So true. I would not say that Last Epoch is more enjoyable than PoE. But this right here absolutely sums it up. It's damn close, but just kind of the overall like community feel of PoE with the trade market and just, I mean, even their all chat's hilarious. Like the community thing of PoE is just very high up, but Last Epoch is really not that far behind, and it hasn't even. It next year is going to be more where I think the argument can really be made is to say which one's better, because there's things that Last Epoch does better just because PoE is a little bit dated. Like it's a 10-year-old game, but I think when PoE 2 comes out, like I don't know, man. I still think PoE 2 is going to take it, but don't forget Last Epoch's been out for 5 years too. Yeah, I mean it has been out for 5 years. 1.0 though is, I mean it servers are down 24 hours before, like they're, I'm almost kind of expecting when Last Epoch launches tomorrow, or by the time this gets onto YouTube, well, not today, that it's not going to be a new game, but I am expecting just kind of like a different feel to it.
But I do think it will plateau in enjoyability until they add more in-game. And by the way, speaking of in-game, in my last dev review I did, or interview I did with Mike from 11 Hour Games on Last Epoch, they actually mentioned or gave us a sneak peek, letting us know that in 1.1 update, the one coming soon, is going to have a pinnacle boss focus. They're actually releasing basically more in-game content is their first primary focus. So I'm sure
he said 1.1 right there, and I know 1.0 is what's coming out. I don't think like pinnacle bosses, I think, are still a little bit away for Last Epoch, because I know there was a dev talk and they said, will there be any like unique or uber bosses, things like that in the beginning, but that's not going to be there at launch. But yeah, 1.1, who knows how far that is, Lord knows. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited once they start adding bosses, because your monolith system and your mapping system with the two, Last Epoch and PoE, very similar, still vastly different though in their own way, right? But the one thing that PoE has that obviously Last Epoch doesn't have much of, and Diablos are a joke, is like those uber bosses. Like they're, people like do it. You want to be able to give people the option to do what they want but still consume the content. So if you have somebody whose like their big thing is fighting bosses, messing with mechanics, you know, all that kind of stuff, great, do that, but don't force somebody to do it. Same with like the mapping system. If people just want to go and clear a huge groups of ads at a time and just destroy things, run maps and run the monolith system. Like have both of those systems and let people do whatever they want. That's why PoE I love. You hardly really have to, you're never really forced to do many bosses other than the first couple to get, you know, void stones. And then if you really want to go and farm uber bosses, you can, but it's absolutely not a necessity to do every season.
That will help subside some of these concerns. But I think this is a flat line in terms of enjoyability, and it takes Path of Exile longer to be able to cross over that enjoyable plateau. And part of the reason of that is because of this respec system I am mentioning. In Path of Exile, in order to get the most out of the game and continue to enjoy it and continue to have this ramping that happens with the Path of Exile, you need to be committed enough to be cool enough with making new characters. It isn't until your second or third character that you really start feeling really good in Path of Exile.
He is 100% true on that. My first character, I felt good. I liked it. Was a void damage based witch, was great. RF Jug, I played my second character. I didn't get obviously very far with either one of those two. Still good, had a good time. Didn't like deep dive into it, and then oh my god, once we got to that third build, man, we loved it, loved it. I think he means in one league. He's talking about one league here because he's saying how kind of difficult it is to do all of this just in one season. But I do agree with that. I would never. This is just me because of the time spent. I would never sit there and make a whole second character in a PoE league. I would never. I really probably wouldn't do it for Last Epoch either. I mean, I did it for preseason, but that's because we've had it for a little bit, like a year-ish. But yeah, I mean, I would never. I personally, just with how long it takes, I would respec a character. So like my Bone Shatter Slayer, like if there was another build I could do a Slayer, I would mess around with it, but I definitely would not make a whole new character. Because that's just not me, but a lot of the PoE community does.
Like you're starting to ramp, you're starting to understand it. So your enjoyability continues to ramp, but only after that second or maybe third character. And often that coincides with additional seasons, meaning you have to wait for maybe there's one season right here and then another season right here. So it might take you quite a bit of time in order to have these seasons come out, in order to try again with the new character and to realize how much you actually love Path of Exile. This is what happened to me. It was my second league or season that I started to really start to enjoy the game. Whereas Last Epoch, this bar graph that goes all the way up here to peak enjoyability, this is all on the same character because of the quality of life, how well they do the respecking, the variety of builds, and how much you can continue just playing your main character throughout the entirety of the time. If you mess up your build, you can respec it again all the way from the beginning. So this is all before the 1.0 release, and it's arguable that this graph I actually might end up crossing over Diablo 4 even sooner because of the new faction system they have. But in the current iteration that I've played, this is sort of how I'm feeling about it. I do think the Path of Exile, in my opinion, even though some people say it's an unfair comparison and Path of Exile has been out 10 years and had all this time to build, etc., I'm just going to compare them because right now you, the person watching this, is debating with my time that I have available after work, what game do I want to play? You're not wondering about in 10 years. So right now, I think Path of Exile, after you have a significant, again, a significant amount of time in the game, is more enjoyable in the end game. I think this is fair, and most hardcore ARPG, not just hardcore from the death perspective, but grinder ARPG players will probably agree the Path of Exile is going to feel better the longer you play it over.
Like I don't even think this is a debate. I think if you are a serious ARPG player, I don't think it's even a question which one you're playing. And I think most of those serious ARPG players would agree. I mean, you're playing Path of Exile. Like you are certainly not playing Diablo. Like, the only reason that Diablo was even so big at launch, and this graph is even a thing, is because everybody played it at launch. And everybody was still in early game and mid game not getting end game. That's why it was so fun. I don't have nearly as much fun at this point starting a season compared to season 1. But it's more from a social aspect. It's not even the gameplay, and the gameplay hasn't even really changed much. So, I mean, but yeah, any ARPG hardcore type of player, I mean, it's Path of Exile. And I don't think that's any offense to Last Epoch or Diablo 4. I don't think either one of them want to be Last Epoch. Certainly Path of Exile. Certainly Diablo doesn't. They cater to the casual audience, and I think Last Epoch knows right now that their game falls almost kind of perfectly right in between somebody that is a super hardcore ARPG grinder can take a break when they're towards about the end of the Path of Exile season, maybe a little over midway through, and go play Last Epoch. And they can hop off of PoE then, and then they are ready to go for next season, back in, and just kind of rotate bouncing back between the two of them. But D4, I mean, come on. No hardcore ARPG player is going to be sitting there steadily playing Diablo 4. They're just not.
For any ARPG at the moment. But that does not mean that you should only focus on this small bit of the graph up here, which is the last portion of the time in which you're playing the game. This right here, this journey that you have with Last Epoch all the way is enjoy.
This right here is what matters. It's this middle area is what matters. Because if you don't get to this point, if you're not having fun early on, you're never going to make it to this. I almost didn't make it to this. I am so glad that Season of Affliction brought me back to PoE. I am so glad, because I appreciate that game so much more and just in such a different way than I did 6 months ago. It's insane. It is absolutely insane.
Enjoyable all the way through. So your first character experience is going to be really good all the way up until in-game, and it's going to be all right in in-game, and there are some changes we will have to see. 1.0, I haven't got to play 1.0.
I think 1.0 is going to be very interesting. I think if they've just, the monolith system is good. I like it. I think it's something they absolutely run with. I don't expect it to change. It does just need a little bit more, but I think it only needs that little bit more if they really are going to go down kind of more towards the Path of Exile side. Because like I said, Epoch, right in the middle. I think if they want to kind of sway a little more towards the PoE, they'll start to go and add more to the monolith system. They'll add the Uber bosses. They'll add the, unique bosses, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure that stuff's going to come. It's just a matter of how much, but I think they're in a very good spot before 1.0.
It's not part of the early access testers, so I will be playing it with you guys as well, and we'll have to see what happens in this portion onwards now that 1.0 is basically being released with the graphical updates, in-game changes, and then we know going forward from here on forward, this is more future here, the 1.1 is going to have more in-game as well going into the future. So that's currently how I feel about Last Epoch. If you're wondering, is this a buy? I've already recommended it in 2 other videos. I believe that if you're somebody who is going to spend 100 hours or less, you are going to have a fantastic time within your 100 hours, but there are plenty of people out, you can even see them in the comments of my videos talking about Last Epoch, that have thousands and thousands of hours into the game and quite enjoy it. It would be foolish of me not to mention that the variety of builds, which I have in all of my videos, basically, the variety of builds and making alts in Last Epoch is going to be a big focus. Trying out all of the different character classes is going to be quite enjoyable as well. There is one other thing to mention about, I did mention respecking quite often with these, and that's part of the reason that this ramps so much, is being able to respec and rebuild your character. Your mastery is locked. So this is sort of like your ascendancy, how you would pick like a Marauder, for instance, in Path of Exile. You can't respec that portion. So Path of Exile actually does have that, even though the quality of life side of it is not better, that respecking totalness of it is actually better in Path of Exile, whereas it's just more accessible in Last Epoch. So if I'm playing a Paladin, I cannot respec from a Paladin to a Void Knight. I would have to make a new character, but you can put points into both trees up to a certain extent. So just the one clarity point as well. That's about it. That's how I feel about it. I'd be curious.
I agree. 100% agree.
To know people who've played both Diablo 4, Last Epoch, and Path of Exile to a large extent, how you feel about this graph, where you think I'm correct, where maybe this is incorrect. Leave your comments down below and I'll be reading them. Love you all, and I'll see you on the next video. Consider subscribing or joining the live streams if you would like to. If not, don't worry about it.
It's the biggest change.
Oh no, got into our next video. Shit.
So if you've watched some
but I totally agree with him. I think this is a great video. I'm gonna put it in here. We'll link it. I think he's spot on. Like I think this graph is pretty close for sure. I don't think he really has too much to change, because I do agree with the enjoyment and the excitement once you're deep into both of the end games. I agree. I think PoE's is 100% better. I think one of the big things that he a lot of the big content creators, mostly ARPG focused ones, is build guides and how does a new person play the game. Generally, a lot of people are looking up build guides, and that kind of dictates a lot of things, because when it comes to a game like Diablo, you can level almost any character and get to world tier 4. It's pretty tough if you're not a avid ARPG player to go in and play custom on Path of Exile. It's just not, and that's okay. That's not what their audience really, goes super in on. Last Epoch is that perfect balance of, I've had a couple characters where I've done build guides, I've had a couple where I just haven't, and you can still get pretty good way into the monolith system if you just have half a brain cell when you're making your build, and you're okay. See damage number go up, that was a good change, and you'll probably be okay. I never made any of my custom builds like into the like enhanced monolith systems just because I didn't really have the time, but he was comfortably going through I want to say like level 80 something monolith, still fully custom. I didn't look anything up, so if I can do it, I think almost anybody can. So let's see what the comments say. This person here is totally thinks he's spot on. Can't wait for 1.0 launch. What do we got? Crazy how accurate this is. People seem to definitely agree here. It's fair POV of all 3 games. This is okay. Pretty good analysis. My feelings too. Thanks, Hasbin, for introducing me to this channel. It's so funny. Yeah, I think this is the big thing too. Right? I think this is the big thing. It's gonna be about the updates. No ARPG at this point launches and is 100% perfect and ready to go. Even when the PoE 2 comes out, I'm not expecting it to be a flawless God-sent game. I'm expecting it to be an improvement from PoE. Not as much content, obviously, because it's a brand new game. But, you know. Don't say launches, it's already launched. Nah, I mean, you know what I mean. When they first come out, even when PoE 1 launched, like that early end game, or that early game, PoE was horrible when it came out. Like, you just look back at the gameplay and the trailers, like when they came out, when they officially have their 1.0, like they're never complete games. It's not what I'm expecting. It's a W video though. 100%.